Hello and welcome to Navigating Today's Geospatial Landscape. My name is Linda Foster and I'm the Director of Land Records and Cadastre Solutions for Esri, and I'm also the incoming or President-elect of the National Society of Professional Surveyors. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person. However, my schedule just didn't allow it, but I am grateful for the invitation and do appreciate the opportunity to be with you here virtually today. A little bit about my background. I spent nearly 20 years in private consulting prior to coming to work for Esri. I'm a registered land surveyor and also certified GIS professional, and I've spent most of my career researching and applying emerging geospatial technologies to traditional land surveying and infrastructure projects. I was one of the first FAA Part 107 certificate holders in my state, and I like to say I've surveyed from above, below, and everywhere in between. A quick agenda for what you can expect here today in my presentation. We're going to go through some history, and you'll see why as we move through the presentation. Then we'll look at some challenges, also opportunities, take a look at how it all stacks up, and then we'll end with some concluding remarks. So let's get started with some history. This is one of my favorite quotes. Change is the only constant in life, and it certainly has felt that way, I know, my whole life. I'm sure many of you can relate to this. There's really just a lot going on in the world, and it seems like it's constantly accelerating at a rapid pace. But before we really dive into that, let's just step back and take a look at where we've come from and perhaps why we feel the way we do. I'm starting the history here, and not to worry, we're going to just step through decades once we move past this slide, but I really want to just set the stage and maybe look at geospatial over time in a perhaps different way than maybe you've approached it or looked at it in the past. So we're starting here at 1854, you'll see why, and then to 1960. After that, we'll go a decade at a time. But what I want to do, and I'll walk through the color scheme I have here to kind of help you understand, because each slide hereafter will follow the same scheme. The light blue font really are milestones or notable things for surveying. The green or kind of yellowish color is positioning and measurement. Orange represents GIS, and red are professional societies in the geospatial realm. So I promised to tell you why we're starting at 1854. I want to completely recognize that from the beginning of time, it seems land surveying has been at the forefront. We've been a foundational part of society's growth and success. And I just want to recognize that up front. However, just to start this particular presentation, we're going to start at 1854, really, because that's where there's some early indications of GIS coming onto the scene. So that being said, let's move into the timeline here. Starting with surveying, 1855, a notable item here, comprehensive surveying instructions are released from the federal government. Again, recognizing that there was a lot of surveying work done prior to this time period here in our own country, just wanting to level set and start with a particular point in time. So I went ahead and chose that as it kind of closely aligns really with the 1854 indications of GIS. 1890s, first surveying regulations are starting to emerge from what I could find in my research in California. And it seems largely driven by the mining activity that was going on. And the surveys were, the requirements for more accuracy or higher accuracy around mining were being the primary driver there. 1930s to 1940s, it seems some further formalization of licensure was happening. Engineering and surveying kind of merging into one to a degree from a licensure and regulatory standpoint. And then closer to the 1960s, some state-specific exams are emerging for surveying licensure. Now moving into the green here, positioning and measurement. Of course, at this time, it's all optical and mechanical, largely. Moving into orange, which represents GIS. Again, like I said, 1854, pretty pivotal point in time for GIS, as it's really the early indication of spatial analytics or spatial analysis. And it's credited to Dr. Ben Snow in London, England, who mapped different features and layered them on top of one another and really was able to draw a conclusion about where the source of cholera was at that point in time. Moving on into professional societies in this period of time. 1934, ASPRS, or the American Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, is founded. And then following along, not too long, is 1941, and ACSM, or the American Congress of Surveying and Mapping, is founded. So 1960 to 1970, what's happening here in this decade? Well, in the surveying realm, engineering programs are starting to reduce surveying coursework. There's a trend for engineering to focus purely on design, and so surveying is starting to fade a bit. And as a result, surveying academic programs are beginning to emerge. In fact, the first being traced back to Fresno State, founded in 1966. 1970, Purdue followed, and then, of course, the University of Florida, 1973, from what I was able to find there. Positioning, let's look at that in this decade. Still largely all optical and mechanical, but it is worth noting that in the 1960s, work had begun towards GPS, of course, by our military here in the United States. The GIS arena, 1963. It's notable to point out that the first GIS, which was really credited to Roger Tomlinson out of Canada, emerged. And that was the application of geographic information systems for natural resources management. And not long after, in 1969, Esri is founded by Jack and Laura Dangermond. Along those lines, interestingly enough, 1966 in the professional society area, URISA is founded, which is our national GIS Professional Association. I've added a color here, you might note, in white, and this is to start tracking computing. So in the 1960s, computers are really starting to advance quite significantly, as a matter of fact, with IBM being a leader. 1970 to 1980. Surveying in the 70s, surveying educational seminars are really starting to trend. 1975, NCEES administers first national fundamentals exam. On the front of positioning and measurement, a couple of key things here I really want you to pay attention to. 1972, first Landsat satellite launched. Very important in the remote sensing arena. And in 1978, first GPS satellite is launched. So also a very, very important date for what will lead in the future for us. And the white category, which is computing, again in the 1970s, computers are continuing to evolve and grow rapidly in their capabilities and functionality. 1980 to 1990. Wow, there's a lot on this slide here. It must have been a busy decade. And indeed it was. Surveying in the 1980s, surveyors are driving continuing education requirements. In 1984, surveying dropped from ABET accreditation for civil engineers. So also something to note there. On the positioning and measurement front, again, key point right here. In 1983, GPS becomes publicly available, albeit the signal is scrambled. However, the Reagan administration at the time did open it for public use, largely driven by aviation and navigation. On the GIS front, what's happening during this time period? Well, in 1981, the first Esri user conference commenced. And not long after, in 1982, Esri released its first commercial GIS product, which was known as ArcInfo. And in 1988, the NCGIA is formed, which is the Center for Research in Geographic Information. On the professional society front, in 1981, NSPS is founded. And on the computing side of things, in the 1980s, computers are really continuing to advance. And interestingly enough, around 1986, the first in-car navigation concepts start to emerge, which is, I think, very interesting to me because we have a lot of chatter around this now, autonomous driving and the like, but this is really where we can track back to some of the first primitive in-car navigation as we know it today. Also, fun fact, this is the decade that I emerged as well. 1990 to 2000. Surveying. Many states are requiring continuing education now. It's picking up steam. In the positioning and measurement front, in the 1990s, instruments are becoming electronic. EDMs and the like are hitting the scene. And in 1998, the first commercial terrestrial LiDAR, released by SciArc, comes to the market. On the GIS front, in 1990, first nationwide digital data set released by the US Census Bureau, known as Tiger data set, as many of you may know it. And in 1991, GIS is really becoming mainstream in many workflows, many organizations and offices. It's really starting to emerge. And in 1999, we saw the first GIS Day launch. And professional societies of note, in 1997, ERISA forms a committee for GISP certification. So they're exploring GISP certification, 1997. Computing, some big things happening in the 1990s here. Computing workstations emerge. This is a big deal. And also, along with them, CDs, USB, and other similar data storage mechanisms are emerging. They're more affordable, they're more portable, and they can hold more data. 2000 to 2010. What's happening here? It looks like a lot, and indeed it was. On the surveying front, many states now are requiring continuing education. That's continuing to come on board from the 90s. And in positioning and measurement, big deal right here in 2000. The government, or the Clinton administration, stopped scrambling the GPS signal. So no longer are we going out and measuring with GPS and then sending data sets in to be corrected, if you will, from that scrambled GPS signal. It's been opened up and unscrambled. GIS in 2001, Esri reaches 1 million GIS users. And in 2009, digital data libraries are starting to proliferate across the US and really within the US government. Professional societies in the 2000s, SAGIS and AAGS leave ACSM. And in 2004, GISCI introduces the GISP certification. Computing, this is the big one. So pay close attention here. In 2004, Web 2.0 hits the scene. What does that mean? The web becomes more interactive. As a result, in 2005, Google Maps emerges. Oh, 2006, look what happens here. Cloud computing, AWS, comes online. All because Web 2.0 rolled out. 2007, the first iPhone. Hard to believe, isn't it? Do you remember life before an iPhone, before smart devices? And in 2009, Uber was founded. So what happened in this decade? What I would quantify it as is a lot of this disruption. Radical change to an existing industry or market due to innovation is really one definition you might find out there if you look up the word disruption. And I would say that that decade from 2010 to 2020 was one of the most disruptive, perhaps, that we've seen in recent time. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have some substantial change and things happening in the decades before. But I would say that, to me, this is a point where we really started to see some acceleration because of some of the things that were starting to converge and come together here. So moving on from 2010 to 2020, what's happening? The surveying realm, in the 2010s, NCAAS begins computerizing exams. Positioning and measurement, another big deal right here. 2016, UAVs are on the scene. FAA Part 107 certification is launched. Now, UAVs, of course, came on the scene before 2016, but I'm noting this particular point in time because that's when the FAA rolled out its Part 107 certification, and it really opened the door for widespread adoption for commercial use of UAVs. What else is happening here in the 2010s in positioning? A couple more big things. Other countries' GNSS systems are maturing. They're coming online. It's not just the GPS constellation anymore that we are able to leverage for positioning. And as a result, machine control is also accelerating. due in large part because of the GNSS capabilities and also communications capabilities. GIS in this decade. Well, 2012, Esri releases cloud-based GIS. So again, that's building on that previous decade of Web 2.0 rolling out and enabling that cloud-based architecture. And then 2018, it's notable here that AI and GIS come together really to form GeoAI. So leveraging machine learning and high resolution imagery to do things like feature extraction and those types of AI analyses. On the professional society front, 2012, ACSM is dissolved, and in 2015, the American Society of Civil Engineers UESI Institute is formed. And computing, in the 2010s, communication and IT infrastructure is maturing. So again, another very active decade. You can kind of see the acceleration, can't you? At least I feel like that's really becoming prominent from 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020. So really the last 25 years. Here we are, 2020, we're not quite halfway through this next decade, but what's going on so far? Well, in surveying, NCWS has computerized all exams, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And from a positioning and measurement standpoint, widespread data collection now. Internet of Things has emerged. What do we mean by that? Sensors, things talking to each other, being connected to your data, to your office, to your field work, all in a network of connectivity in real time. And also important to note, NGS's NSRS modernization, another big deal. This will be the new basis or foundation for much of the work that we do in the surveying and geospatial communities from here forward. So again, some big things happening. 2020. Well, we all know what was happening in 2020. On the GIS side of things, it really almost feels like we've come full circle now. We started this presentation talking about cholera in 1854 and how spatial analysis helped with that response in a health emergency. Well, we were in a similar situation in 2020 when COVID-19 hit. And as many of you probably followed the Johns Hopkins dashboards and many of the spatial applications that were built around GIS, it was a huge application that was relied upon to respond to COVID-19 during yet again another health emergency that we were responding to. And what about computing? What are some of the hot ticket items or big things that are going on here in the 2020s? I would say probably generative AI really hit the scene after 2020. That's one of the big tech trends, if you will, or new things on the block, if you will, that I think is going to, again, shape and change how it is we do work and how we approach our work. So I wanted to walk through this timeline just because I thought it was interesting to look at and compare some of the different areas of geospatial through time and what was happening decade by decade, just to see some patterns and trends perhaps, and help us all maybe understand why we are where we are and why we practice the way we do, we interact the way we do. And we all know, of course, with change, with, as we've noted in the last 25 years, especially very rapid, accelerated change, comes challenges. But not only challenges, also opportunities. And so I was very intentional in including them both on this slide and in this next section, because as we all know, challenges are it's obstacles, it's difficulty, but often with challenges comes new opportunity. And so I really want to thread these two together because I do believe they go hand in hand quite often. So let's just take a quick look at some of the challenges we're faced with, maybe coming out of some of those historical things that we've looked at over time here in the timeline. Well, we're faced with a number of challenges, perhaps. Deregulation of licensure. From a land surveying standpoint, this is a big one. We're constantly responding to different states who are sunsetting or attempting to deregulate licensure in our practice. What about workforce and workforce development? It's no secret. We've known for many years that we are losing more folks out of the profession than we have coming in. And we also could potentially correlate that to the silver tsunami, as some call it, or the rapid retirement of the baby boomer generation leaving the workforce. And interesting to note that the baby boomer generation is when the most babies were born, and from then on we've had a steady decline in just how many babies are born in our country, for instance, to even fill roles in our society. And so there's many different opinions and theories about why we are seeing the workforce situation we are, but I think it's a number of factors that plays into it. Technological disruption, that can be a challenge, right? How do we manage it? How do we handle it, integrate it, address it? Well, preserving legacy knowledge, that goes back into the workforce development conversation and retirements. You know, many of these individuals that are retiring out were very dedicated to their organizations and agencies and also their profession, and carry decades of incredibly valuable knowledge with them. So we're seeing a rapid loss of this legacy information. And I think many of us are grappling with, how do we capture that? How do we preserve that so that we have it moving forward for future generations? Standards, of course, constantly in the backs of our mind. What about federal infrastructure investment? Our government has invested the most money in generations into improving and updating and expanding our country's infrastructure. Perhaps a challenge, also opportunity very much, I think, in that instance. So what does this all mean? I would add another word up here just to help try to synthesize all of this, and that is transformation. You know, the technical definition, if you were to look it up, is a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance. Well, I think maybe many of us could agree perhaps that the geospatial profession as a whole is seeing a tremendous amount of this. If you go back to the timeline I just went through, especially the last 20 to 25 years, which that's been my span of career largely. I know I've certainly seen and felt a lot of change and transformation happening through this time. And I promised you that along with challenges, we also have opportunities. So some of those things we looked at in the word cloud that are challenges are starting to translate, I believe, into opportunities for many of us in the geospatial profession. Let's just take a quick look at the increasing investment in our infrastructure in the country. There's a shining light on the importance of high accuracy location. We really have an opportunity with this infrastructure investment that's being made to really capture and preserve the work that's being done and make sure that it's preserved into the future for the generations to come to service it. You know, in most cases, these design lives are probably 60, 70, 80 years in length. So what are some ways that we may see this starting to play out? More robust asset management, perhaps digital submission requirements, enhanced field capabilities, which we're already seeing, reality capture, scanning, terrestrial scanning, mobile LiDAR, mobile scanning, UAV scanning and aerial imaging, system integration. Again, all those things we looked at kind of in that timeline. Now we can see how perhaps it will be applied moving forward. And with all the advancements we have had in communications and the IT arena, we now are able to really work together in lockstep across all of these things rather than be so siloed like we have been for many years. So it's really an exciting time, I think. So with that, I want to just go through how I kind of synthesize all of this. How does it stack up? What does it look like? How do we find some order in all of this chaos and this change? And, you know, we've gone through all of these things. And moving forward, how do we think about all of this? Where is our place? And I would just like to share a graphic that I've kind of built here over time that helps me understand some of this better. I'm going to start it with geodesy, you know, that pinpoint on the surface of the earth. Really, geodesy is the language of where things are positionally, where they are in the world. And it's a common language that we can all leverage and talk to one another from a data standpoint and a spatial data standpoint, which will become more critical now than ever as we move into the future, because now we understand that it's very important that our data sets are able to integrate and to talk to one another. And geodesy really is a foundation underneath that. Next, land surveying. So we as surveyors will leverage the geodesy, the National Spatial Reference System that's coming out in the work that we do, and we really are the foundation underneath it all for everything that's in our society, whether it's boundary surveying, preserving the value of our land, whether it's engineering and topographic or construction surveys and the like. We are, as we all know, the first in quite often and the last out for so much of our society's critical infrastructure and needs. So really, that's why I put mapping / surveying next, because without the critical work that we do as surveyors and mappers, we couldn't build everything else in our world and our society on top of that. So the next layer, this is the product we produce as mappers and land surveyors, especially land surveyors. For instance, land records and cadastre, perhaps right-of-way and engineering records. This is all resultant from the work that we do as surveyors and also perhaps as mappers. It's fundamental, foundational work that is produced by our group, which then serves as a foundation underneath things like land administration. Having these land records and products that are produced by surveyors and mappers is what allows us to be able to perform valuation and taxation tasks in our communities and our societies so that we can run an orderly and vibrant community and society. Along with that's planning and zoning, of course, to keep order and structure and, again, vibrance and resiliency in our communities and our world. Which underpins what is the next layer the way I think about this, and that is our built and our natural worlds. And I put these side by side intentionally because I really believe we have a need to balance what we're doing in these two arenas. Our built world, of course, our infrastructure, our construction and development activities, all of the things that we do so that we have places for people to live, we have streets for people to drive on, we have power, infrastructure, and the like. We also have to balance that carefully with our natural world. We only have so much for resources. Our natural world is a very vital part of our resiliency and our comfort and success as a species in our communities and our society. So again, everything that we do as surveyors and mappers underpins all of this. And at the very top, last but not least, but perhaps one of those things that's kind of emerging and coming onto the scene here is the digital twin. And I didn't put that in my timeline, perhaps I should have, but really everything that we've talked about culminates with the end goal, or maybe not an end goal, but an additional goal of the digital twin. And that's really the concept of modeling our built and natural worlds with sensors and connected things to really manage and operate our world. And where does GIS fit into it all? Well, it's the wrapper around it all. It houses all of this critical information. It allows us to analyze and see trends and patterns and ask questions and get answers in ways we can't when we don't put this information together and leverage it. So going all the way back to 1854, and why was that integral in the conversation around GIS? It's really about spatial analysis. It's about taking many different types of spatial information, which is what we create as mappers and surveyors, and leveraging it to make better decisions and to communicate with each other more effectively. So that being said, as far as opportunities go, I would say be ready. I suspect we're going to see some statutory as-building requirements coming out in the near future. Perhaps they may be specifying GIS, which is why I kind of put these two together, because land surveyors undoubtedly will be involved in as-building activities and the like. but there may be specifications coming along that are requiring that to either be done in a GIS environment or delivered for a GIS environment. Industry standard contract templates, including specific standards. I suspect we'll see maybe another revolution of standards come out, maybe for as-builting or other aspects of the geospatial work that we are doing, maybe metadata standards to support the NSRS modernization and the like. And then again, just project standards and specifications. Requirements for digital data submission. You know, we all know that's here in some instances and certainly coming. But these are some things that I think, you know, we as practicing professionals can keep in mind, be mindful of, be on the lookout for, really be ready for, and hopefully embrace as opportunities rather than yet again another challenge. Now, as I mentioned before, opportunities and challenges quite often go hand in hand, but I think if we view them that way, sometimes it's a little bit more palatable and easier to get through. So just in a quick conclusion here, I want to wrap up by showing this image here from our friends at Kick Kids Into Survey, Elaine Ball, and the great work they're doing in helping communicate with the young people in our world to come be surveyors and geospatial professionals. This is one of my favorite posters that they've put out, and this is what's a world without surveyors? And I think this just sums it up beautifully. We have chaos, right? I mean, things aren't in the right place, things don't work together, there's just dysfunction, right? And so it really, I think, illustrates what things would look like if we didn't have those of us in the profession doing what we do every day. And last, I'll leave you with this quote, again, another favorite of mine. It's not necessarily the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. Coming from, of course, our friend Charles Darwin. I think this is very fitting, just because we do see so much change in our profession, in our world, in our society, all around us. Again, it's the constant in our world is change, and in our lives is change. And I think when we embrace that and perhaps are responsive to it, it's a better path perhaps for all involved. And with that, I would just like to end as I always do. Those who show up shape the world. Thank you so much for showing up and helping shape the world. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you in person, but thank you so much for the invitation to speak. And until next time, stay safe and be well. Thank you.